It was 2002 when the Red Dead series was first unveiled to the world, and back then it had absolutely nothing to do with Rockstar Games. Now, it wouldn't be too long before they did get involved, of course, but originally Red Dead Revolver, the predecessor to the now massive Red Dead Redemption, belonged to another company, and a very different one at that. As strange as it may sound all these years later, the Red Dead games only exist today because of Japanese publisher Capcom. There are a couple of trailers still knocking around from that period, and they show a rather different kind of game to the one you may have played when Revolver was eventually released in 2004. Capcom's original vision had been more arcade-like, its characters far more surreal, like this one here, who is some kind of bird man? I don't know. And according to those who worked on the project back then, it wasn't turning out all that great.
The game wasn't actually very fun. Like, the shooting was really weird. It was somewhere between a cross between sort of like Panzer Dragoon and I don't know, the really bad Japanese action games that were coming out in the early 2000s. We definitely had all those sort of tropes. Like, one of the big inspirations for it at the time was Tenchu, the Tenchu games, which are great games, but if you play a Tenchu game now, kind of the controls feel a little archaic.
Sure. That's
exactly how Red Dead felt.
Capcom had been bankrolling this game for a couple of years by the time it was revealed, but although they were paying for it, they weren't making it themselves. For that, they'd found a team in San Diego, California, called Angel Studios. Now, this was a developer with a varied background. It had made its name to begin with as a CGI studio for hire, with one of its first projects being the volcano eruption from the end of this Church of Scientology commercial in the late 80s, although it was probably the studio's work on the movie Lawnmower Man that really put them on the map. Not a great film, if truth be told, but the visual effects were impressive for the time, particularly if you're into VR sex scenes.
You're beautiful.
At some point in the 90s, however, Angel Studios began turning its efforts towards video games instead, working with Nintendo on a few early N64 projects, with Rockstar on games like Midnight Club and Smuggler's Run, and crucially with Capcom on the N64 port of Resident Evil 2. This port had gone down really well, so well in fact that Capcom offered Angel Studios a shot at making something else, not a port this time, but a title of their own. And I know what you're thinking, Red Dead Revolver, right? Well, no, not quite yet. Instead, they wanted them to make a game that was initially being referred to as SWAT. This was going to be a single-player, split-screen game in which you could control a 4-person SWAT team and then switch between each of the characters in that unit on the fly. There's actually a game that did something real similar for the Amiga called Hired Guns, and that was developed incredibly by a studio known then as DMA Design, as in, yes, the very same team that would go on to make Grand Theft Auto and become Rockstar North. I don't know what to do with that coincidence, but it's a good one. However, SWAT wouldn't get too far into development before the team's boss over at Capcom, a man called Yoshiki Okamoto, who'd made a cowboy game of his own in the 80s, was said to have been watching a spaghetti western starring... Oh, one second. Ringo Starr.
Why are they your women?
Apparently this film, for whatever reason, had given him a change of heart. Angel Studios would now be making a western third-person shooter instead. SWAT is scrapped. Well, almost. The acronym, at least, becomes Spaghetti Western Action Title. And so Red Dead Revolver is born. Thanks, Ringo.
What do you mean?
Alright, let's talk about the game they actually started making. Although Angel Studios is the developer for Revolver, Capcom sends over a couple of its own developers to help lead the project, including character designer Akira Yoshida, better known by his pen name Akiman, the creator of Street Fighter's Chun-Li. Akiman had some interesting ideas for how the enemies should be designed in Red Dead.
All the characters were basically designed on people in the studio. This is sort of how much of a kind of piss take Red Dead Revolver was, really. And so when you see characters like Pig Josh, that's based after Josh Needleman Carlton, who's the lead designer. Mr. Kelly, who's the character that you fight at the end of the game, is based on Michael Kelly, who's the lead engineer. Perry, who's one of the characters that you fight, is Chris Perry, the particle artist. You can't quite tell if it's homage or if they're just being a bit mean.
The protagonist himself, Nate Harlow, or Red, was known as Red Hand in Capcom's version of the story, with a plot heavily inspired by the Clint Eastwood movie High Plains Drifter. If you haven't seen it, it's part Western, part ghost story, I guess, in which a mysterious stranger seeks vengeance on behalf of a man that was killed in the same town shortly before his arrival. The film suggests, but never entirely confirms, that this is in fact the very same man delivering justice from beyond the grave.
I never did know your name.
Yes, you do.
So in the actual Red Dead Revolver, you see that Red's family is killed in front of them as a young man, and then he grows up to become a deadly bounty hunter. But Capcom wanted him to die as well in this part of the game, returning from the afterlife with one of the culprit's red bandanas wrapped around his burned hand, hence Red Hand. The enemies you'd then hunt throughout the rest of the game wouldn't be infamous bounties that you need to collect, but rather the very same outlaws that had done you wrong in the first place. The missions wouldn't have been quite the same either. If you played the final release, you might remember that you fight across this train pretty early on in the story, and that level did exist in Capcom's version of events, except, well, it was just a bit more Capcom. Really?
The train level in Red Dead Revolver was originally sort of like, it was almost like it was something out of Mario, and that there was a great big heart coach with like a princess character in there that got a Gatling gun out and shot you as you rode by on your horse. That was sort of how the original level was meant to go.
A lot of these ideas sound kind of great, I think, but the problem was they'd stayed mostly ideas, and disconnected ones at that. By the end of 2002, Red Dead Revolver had been in development for almost 3 years, and Capcom was beginning to lose faith in the project. Thankfully for Angel Studios, this had not been the only game they'd been working on. In 1999, the developer had seen some success with an open-world driving game called Midtown Madness, a title that had attracted the attention of another company with a knack for both open worlds and driving around inside them recklessly. I'm of course talking about Rockstar Games. They'd end up working together on titles like Midnight Club and Smuggler's Run after this, cementing a really solid relationship along the way. And so, on the back of a successful GTA Vice City launch, Rockstar's parent company, Take-Two Interactive, decides to acquire Angel Studios outright, renaming it Rockstar San Diego and giving them a much, much better logo in the process. Following the acquisition, any outstanding projects like Revolver were evaluated, with some of them being cancelled then and there if their investment wasn't seen as worthwhile. Luckily for Red Dead, Sam Houser, one of the co-founders of Rockstar Games, had taken a real shine to the project. Here's a quote from his brother, Dan, who I'm told at the time did not rate it anywhere near as highly. The one that always caught our eye was the cowboy game that looked very good. For the time, it looked visually spectacular, but also, speaking to the management guys there, it was a complete mess. It didn't really exist as a game. Now, it's worth pointing out that Red Dead Revolver is still being published by Capcom. The acquisition hasn't changed that. However, they quite clearly want out, and Rockstar Games is more than happy to take it off their hands. Here's another quote from Dan Houser. Capcom were prepared to walk away from it, so we said we'd finish it, and all they ever wanted was the rights to publish it in Japan if we ever did finish it, which they never thought it could be. Now, from what I've heard, this quote is missing one quite important detail. At this point in time, Capcom is desperate to please Rockstar because they really want to publish the Grand Theft Auto games in Japan, which they do end up doing. And so, Rockstar take over. The Capcom designers go home, Angel Studios, now Rockstar San Diego, are given about 9 months to salvage whatever they have here and turn it into a game that can finally be sold. And it's got to be said that despite Sam Houser's enthusiasm for this project, no one at Rockstar is really looking at this game as a potential franchise that could one day rival even Grand Theft Auto. In fact, the rumour was they intended to originally sell it underneath the Global Star label, which is the budget label at Take-Two, rather than call it a Rockstar product.
And so we started to address the problems with the controls, and we actually made it fun. We added a cover system, or we made the cover system a lot more robust. To tell you the truth, the biggest problem we had wasn't really there. It was much more, how do we sew this together into a compelling narrative? Because Rockstar is a story company, and where Capcom's quite willing to do something a bit wacky, we had just a series of really cool environments that were clearly stolen almost directly from a series of movies that came out in the 60s and the 70s. We had this bunch of really bizarre characters, and we had to make sense of it.
If you're as good a bounty hunter as O'Grady says you are, you could help me with a couple of real outlaws wreaking havoc in my territory.
Whereas Capcom had pushed for these really exaggerated caricatures, Rockstar wanted its outlaws' personalities to be wacky and not necessarily their physical appearance. Imagine that, Rockstar Games coming into a project you're working on and asking for things to be toned down a bit. But of course San Diego obliged, well, as much as they could within the time frame that they had left, because yeah, if you play Red Dead Revolver today, it still is a very, very different experience to Redemption.
My boys will keep you busy.
Although, saying that, there is some shared DNA here. John Marston and Red have the same scars on their face, and eventually some of the characters from Revolver would be added to Redemption's multiplayer. In fact, at one point, Red Dead Redemption was being talked about as a direct sequel to Red Dead Revolver.
Originally, the plot for Red Dead Redemption was meant to center around Nate Harlow's son. You were mad at your dad, and then one day he shows up, and he's been hunted ever since he killed the governor, and bad guys come and they ruin your nice life out in the frontier, and so you go on a kind of like revenge mission to find your dad.
God. So your story almost exists in the end of that game then?
Yes. But I was very keen to kind of push the spaghetti western even further, to kind of like do like my touch piece was Once Upon a Time in the West, which is this sprawling 3-hour-long epic, whereas Rockstar were very much on the Wild Bunch. They wanted men who had kind of outgrown their era, like dinosaurs, you know, after a time when dinosaurs they're useful.
And so yes, today Rockstar has transformed the Red Dead series into something much, much grander than Revolver could ever have possibly dreamed of. But I tell you what, I sort of love that Red Dead Redemption, one of the most critically acclaimed games of all time, owes its very existence to a team that had a poster of Shanghai Noon hanging in their office and decided to base their game's box art on a screaming Owen Wilson's face. Look at it. That's where Red Dead Redemption comes from. Brilliant. And on that bombshell, thank you for watching People Make Games. If this is your first time on the channel, then we've got a bunch of other cool stories about games and those who make them that you might want to check out. And as ever, we are almost entirely funded by Patreon here, so if you really like what we do, please consider supporting us. If not, that's cool too. Just watch our videos, that'd be enough. All right, see you soon, and goodbye.